what we do, the self-exploration, self-inquiry. This is the direct seeing. I attempt to see who I the witness, not the waker. The waker might be holding the paper, but I, the witness, have to attempt to see the reality as it is. Yes, that is direct seeing. So now simply keep the paper in front of you. Look at the paper. Simply look at it. Attempt to take a step beyond the waker and recognize you are the witness of the waker that is looking at the paper. Are you able to recognize the waker and its waking world object, the paper? Yes, and you are beyond. You are the witness. Now you have to do the self-exploration from this third standpoint, the witness's standpoint. Yeah? From the witness's standpoint, look at the waking world object called the paper. Does the paper have its own inherent independent existence beyond the witnessing field? Can the paper have its own inherent independent existence beyond the witnessing field? The waker is using his so-called eyes to see the paper. The paper is off-white in color. So the waker's sense of sight says the paper exists at the time when the white color is being perceived. The waker says the paper exists at the time when the white color is being perceived by the waker's eyes. Now touch the paper. The waker's sense of touch says that the paper has a smooth texture. It's nice and smooth. So that means that the paper exists at the time when the smoothness is perceived. Remember, sense of touch cannot see. Sense of touch can only talk about smoothness or hardness. Yeah, can only speak about texture. So sense of touch says that the paper has a smooth texture. So the paper exists at the time when the smoothness is being perceived. Now stop moving your finger on the paper. Become still. Still holding the paper, but become still. Do you recognize smoothness is not perceived? The smoothness has disappeared. In fact, the sense of touch has disappeared. To experience the sense of touch again, you have to move it again. You have to move the finger again on the paper. Do you realize this? So what is sense of touch saying? Sense of touch is saying that the smooth texture exists only on movement. And so the paper exists only when the smoothness is perceived. Sense of touch cannot see, sense of touch cannot smell, cannot hear, cannot taste. Has this become clear, what I'm saying? Now move to the third. Move the paper closer to the waker's ears and hear the crackling sound. Now the waker's sense of hearing says that the paper makes a crackling sound. The waker's sense of hearing says that the paper makes a crackling sound. Now stop. Just listen. So, The sense of hearing says that the paper exists at the time the crackling sound is there. Now the crackling sound is not there. Can the sense of hearing say that the paper exists now? Remember, sense of hearing cannot see, cannot touch, cannot taste or smell. It can only hear. Yeah? So the waker's sense of hearing says that the paper exists only when the crackling sound is being produced or being perceived. Dive deeper into this. Dive deeper into this. You are at this standpoint, the standpoint of the witness, remember. You are observing the waker do all this experimentation. Now take the paper from the side and taste it. It has a bland, woody taste. Yeah? What does sense of taste say? Stop tasting it. Sense of taste says it is bland and woody. So the paper exists only at that time when the bland, woody taste is being perceived. When there is no bland, woody taste, there is no paper. Do you see it? Remember, sense of taste cannot see, cannot touch, cannot hear, cannot smell. It can only taste. Now take the paper closer to the nose and smell it. Those who have a very sensitive nose will know that it has a subtle woody aroma. Those who are not too sensitive in smell will say, oh, there is no smell. So sense of smell says it has a bland, a subtle aroma, a very subtle aroma. So the paper exists at the time that the subtle woody aroma is being perceived. Other than that, the sense of smell cannot give testimony for the existence of the paper. Do you see where I am going with this? There is one perception at a time. One perception at a time. That particular sense can give the testimony of the existence of the object only when that particular information pertaining to that sense is available. Not otherwise. On deeper Atma Vichara, it becomes evident that these 5 perceptions do not exist all at once. They are not continuously present. They are not permanent straight line. Yeah? Therefore, if they are not continuously present, they cannot provide testimony for each other. Sense of sight cannot say, yes, sense of taste says bland woody taste, so it exists. No, they cannot provide testimony for each other. They cannot even provide testimony to each other because there is only one perception at a time. Now go deeper. If you've reached here for those sharp ones, go one step deeper. If there is only one perception at a time, is it really perception or is there knowledge of perception from the witness's standpoint? You are sitting in the audience. You are seeing the waker on the screen in his waking world. It is simply knowledge of one scene. One perception at a time. One perception at a time. And there is a gap between 2 perceptions. That is why you can say one perception at a time, right? Otherwise, you would never be able to tell one perception from the other. It would be one long single perception. Do you notice the gap of nothingness that is sandwiched between 2 perceptions? This gap erases whatever memory you have from the previous perception. Do you notice it? Yeah, you put your spectacles on your head. And you start doing the experiment, and now you want to make notes, and you're looking, where are the spectacles? You just forgot you put them up here. Again, you remember, and then it comes down. Yes, happens to all of us. The gap has the capacity to erase perceptions. It keeps erasing the previous perception. It keeps erasing the previous perception. That is why the more you hug your child, it's not enough. You want to hug more. The more you hug your partner, it's not sufficient. You want to touch more. The more you eat, it's not sufficient. You want to eat more. Stomach says, I'm done. But because the gap wiped away the perception of that beautiful or delicious flavor, you are not satiated. You want it more. Again, you want it more, because after every perception, the gap wipes away, erases the previous perception. What you are not recognizing is that you are the witness. The witness is not the waker. The waker can taste, the witness cannot taste. The waker can see, the witness cannot see. The waker can touch and feel the passion, experience it, enjoy it. The witness cannot enjoy. The witness is like as if behind a glass wall. He wants to enjoy, but he cannot enjoy. Don't you have that feeling? You're never satiated. How much ever you touch, how much ever you taste, how much ever you smell, how much ever you see, how much ever you hear, it's not sufficient. You want more, 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 more. Do you realize this? It's because you are that witness that is beyond the glass wall. You can never be satiated because it is only information, it is data. Data cannot satisfy you. How much ever delicious food you see in a 3D movie and the food is even coming towards you, it cannot satiate you, it cannot satiate your hunger, right? It's exactly like that. It is like that 3D movie. I don't know what they are called. You know, those virtual things, they come at you, like the movie Avatar. You have this whole forest coming, things coming at you. Like that it is. That is what is the waking state. You are the witness beyond. You want to enjoy the waking state, but you are unable to enjoy. Do you see that? Dive deeper, dive deeper. If you're still not able to dive deeper, don't worry. We will get there. Just notice that there is little more work for me to do. I have to get there and understand what this gap does, moment to moment to moment. So the five senses cannot provide testimony to each other. There is only one perception at a time. Between two perceptions, there is a gap. The gap erases perceptions. That is why there is no sense of satisfaction or contentment. What does thought do? In retrospect, thought puts all of these five perceptions together and then says the paper must exist, has to exist. Sense of sight said yes, sense of sound said yes, sense of taste said yes, sense of touch said yes, sense of smell said yes. It puts all the five yeses together in retrospect and says the paper must exist. And it exists even when I, the witnessing field, am not there. Is it possible? It's not possible. The thought which is saying this itself is a perception. Thought cannot recognize the gap in between two thoughts because the thought arises and the thought ends. Where it ends, the gap begins. How can the thought go into the gap? It cannot recognize the gap. Do you see that? So intellectualization cannot get you there because thought cannot provide testimony for the existence of the gap. Therefore, whatever the thought says is not proof enough. Here, whatever perception of sight says, sense of sight says, is not proof enough. Whatever sense of sound says is not proof enough. Whatever sense of smell says is not proof enough. Whatever sense of taste says is not proof enough. And whatever sense of touch says is not proof enough. Thought, which combines all of these, can never go into the gap between two thoughts. So it's not proof enough. Feeling. Feeling has its own language. It takes what it likes from this and discards what it does not like. Yeah? It is very partial and it keeps changing its party every day. So it is not proof enough. There is no proof of the existence of that paper sitting in front of the waker. There is no proof of the inherent, independent existence of the paper that is sitting in front of the waker right now. It is all simply knowledge. Knowledge. Waking world knowledge. Even the idea of the space and time in which that paper exists right now, the waking space, the waking time in which that paper exists, that is also simply a thought. Because the waking space-time is different from the dream space-time. Do you realize this? And there is no space-time in deep sleep. So space-time is also not continuous. Space-time is also not independently, inherently existing, apart from the witnessing awareness field. So what does this finally bring us to? When I am, then the world is there. Then the paper is there and the paper exists in space-time. When I am not, the world is not.